Welcome to Off the Record News. I'm your host, Diana Longrie. Thank you for tuning in. Off the Record News is brought to you from the Valley Access Studios out of Stillwater. Now, Off the Record News is cable cast every Saturday afternoon from these studios, and today we have a live audience. And if you in the future would like to come down to Stillwater to the Valley Access Studios and be part of our audience, Saturday afternoon is when you'll find us here. We welcome you in our studios and you can watch the show firsthand. Now, today's program, I have with me Councilmember Loren Sederstrom from the City of Grant. And what we've been doing over the last few months is that once a month, we have had the opportunity of chatting with Councilmember Loren Sederstrom about some of the discussions going on in the City of Grant before the City Council, and also talking about some of the important discussions going on at the Rice Creek Watershed District meetings. And so I'd like to welcome my guest, Mr. Loren Sederstrom, Councilmember of City of Grant. Thank you, Loren.
Well, thank you, Diana, for having me. It's good to bring the people up to date. There's a lot of things going on, we're looking at a period of about 30 or 40 years here, or even more than that, because what has happened all around the country is they used to have dump sites and people would just dump things in there before we realized about pollution and the effects thereof. And so what happened in Grant is Mahtomedi has built 3 of their 4 schools actually within the City of Grant. And there was a man, Charlie Johnson, had 80 acres. He quit farming in 1954. He started started operating a dump. Well, that's fine, but now the school has been building on that dump site and it's caused some issues. So and last time I think we talked about the surcharge where they put 500,000 yards of dirt on top of the municipal waste part of it where they put the construction materials. And what that does is like squeezing an orange, the juice comes out the bottom. And so we've had some problems. And so Council Member Lanu and myself have been trying to get to the bottom of this, and we've engaged the Rice Creek Watershed because this parcel of land is within the Rice Creek Watershed, and they're in charge of groundwater, surface water, and pollution. So the first clip we're going to have is a discussion about this and the pollution at Rice Creek Watershed. So if we could play that clip, please, we'll talk on the other side.
Sullivan Council Stormwater Grant application. I'm asking for the City of Grant that you consider us fill out the application that's going here. We've met just about your primary goals over here that are and they're secondary for the application. One of the things that we're talking about again is the illicit discharge from Wildwood Elementary into Lost Lake. I sent, I don't see Samantha here right now, but I sent over emails to her. A lot of the pictures on here. Some of this you will see, this picture right here is like an algae bloom you might see in late August. It's there right now.
Is that Lost Lake?
This is Lost Lake. Some of the stuff you're going to see, the stuff that's been running through there, it's not naturally occurring, it's green as there. Orange, you can see what we talked about that's going on in there. We should be looking at very carefully. One of the things that it talks about in your application is signage. And I think there's no more important place to talk about signage than on this fishing pier in Lost Lake, where we feel all these toxins are going into. It's been listed by the NPC as high mercury. There's nothing to stop these kids are out there fishing here this weekend. So, and we don't know what's causing this algae bloom so early in the year. So, I think one thing that I would like to ask is that we apply with the Metropolitan Council on the application to find out and establish where that plume is from the former Bel Air sanitation site. If we don't have funding, that might be a great place to do. It's job ready to just establish where it is. And it talks about education. We're going to educate our people, find out where it is, and see what we can do with it before. And it talks about if it's been in an area that hasn't gotten grants, we said before. Well, I don't know in the City of Grant we've ever applied for a grant for anything. We aren't too sharp that way.
Process you just go through, Phil.
So I'm
Some of our viewers, they may wonder how common it is for council members of a city within the boundaries of a watershed district to actually go to the meetings of their watershed district and to work with the officials of the watershed district. And while it might be a new thing for the city of Grant, it is not unheard of or uncommon in other watershed districts. For instance, Maplewood and North St. Paul, I know of particular projects that the cities have particularly partnered with their watershed districts to accomplish common goals. And so it is not uncommon for elected officials of cities and municipalities to partner up with those elected officials of their watershed districts. So I think that this is really very forward-thinking and progressive on the part of you and Councilmember Lanoux to be saying, you know, here's information that we have as council people. These are concerns we have within our boundaries that as elected people, we have the ability to have an impact on, and we want to share this information with you. So first of all, that's not uncommon, and it's really a good thing that you're opening that line of communication with your water district in this matter. So go ahead and talk a little bit more about what the issue is here.
Well, I want to hitchhike on what you're saying to begin with. We have an appointment list in January, and different people are kind of appointed liaison with the watershed districts, okay? But we have a weed inspector, we have all kinds of appointments. But what I've seen happen my 2 years on the city council is basically they ignore it. It's just a paper. They don't do anything. In one of the things we're going to talk about, we have another clip that's a little bit longer. They actually talk about the process that the Rice Creek watershed and how they work with different districts. The interesting thing is that this grant program was sent out, the email was sent out, and our administrator never forwarded it to our official city email, so we were unaware of it. And you'll see this come out in the next clip that we have, because how they partner is they pay 50% and the city pays 50%, so it's a win-win for both people. And so why don't we play the next clip, and I think that they cover some of that.
Good.
We have 6 of them that came in. We had a process that the city council would have to approve a letter of intent with that process. Is that taking place?
Phil, I thank you for bringing that up. Actually, it was a resident of Grant that found on your Rice Creek watershed website, and I apologize for coming late to the dance here today. I just found out late yesterday when checking my email from a resident who's in Arizona today. Yes, this stuff does get forwarded to our city, but it doesn't get forwarded to the councilman. So this is the first I heard of it was yesterday afternoon. That's why I'm here today. So I didn't have time to, prepare anything. I know it's 4 days out, and what I'm showing here by being here today is that yes, we are willing to come in there and do that. Would our council majority send it forward? Probably not. But I want to show that there are some councilmen that are concerned, and in your MS4 meeting that has to be filled in and done by June, which is a federally mandated program through the EPA, administered by the MPCA. Our city has chosen to put it on their city cleanup.
Yeah.
People are going to bring in their garbage. They're not going to walk over and look and talk about stormwater management, which we have in a public hearing. This is an effort to quiet this. So I'm not the one to make it quiet. I guess I'm the one that's going to come and bring it to your attention.
Okay, so now I just want to clarify. It hasn't been applied for, and so you need to go through a process.
Correct.
And that'll go through, Sam will follow through that? or-
Well, it's Loren on our
Loren?
staff,
Okay.
but the deadline, the board approved a deadline. It was,
It's the 14th.
it was already on the, no, we were supposed to get the information from each of the cities by the 5th,
Yeah.
which was last week. So that, and we have 6 communities that met the deadline and submitted stuff on time that we're talking about today. Second part of that, in addition to not meeting the deadline, let me back up further. We sent this information to every single city in our watershed. per the contact information that we've had as part of our city-county meetings. So either the administrator, I don't know off the top of my head who at Grant, but probably the administrator or some staff got the information.
Yep.
They, I guess how they distribute it to their bosses or their councils, that's not something we get involved with, but it was sent to the city of Grant. We had a deadline there. As part of that, we also need, by the 5th, I think it's the 5th or the 7th, I forgot, but it was last week. We also need the letter of intent signed by either the administrator or the mayor that says that, that because we're not taking on any financial liability for these grants, if you receive that money, the match would have to come through the city. So that letter of intent is to identify that if you get that you understand that we're submitting it because we're required in the grant to submit it as the grant applicant, but we're not.
So Mr. Sederstrom, my question here is that obviously it seems like there's been a disconnect in communication between your city administrator providing this information and the deadline information and the grant information to the council so that the council could make that decision as to whether or not this is something that they want to apply for. Do you have an estimate as to what the value of that grant might have been had the city of Grant been able to apply so that they could determine the scope and breadth of this plume that you're concerned about?
I'm not positive, but I think it could be up to the participation of the watershed up to about $50,000, I believe, and then the city would then partner. Again, we're talking about this former dump site and the plume that it generates. No one knows anything about it. They were supposed to drill some wells, monitoring wells. They've never been done. They weren't supposed to break the seal of the dump, which we talked about last time. They've done that. They're proposing, Rink 2 is proposing putting a hockey arena, $12 to $14 million hockey arena. But let me back up a little bit to what was in this clip. We're supposed to have a stormwater MS4 hearing every year to inform the citizens what we're doing, what they can do, and get input. The mayor and the majority of the council, they decided not to have this.
Right, and tell our viewers, what is this MS4 hearing? I mean, what is the content and scope of the hearing? I mean, what's it for?
Well, it's supposed to make sure that we're complying with groundwater reporting, like all the water that runs off through the ditches. Of course, we don't have a storm sewer system, so that's not for stormwater. We don't have that problem. But it also is an opportunity for citizens to report any illicit discharges. Mm-hmm. And they had a couple of brochures at the cleanup, and when we ran the cleanup, the Grant Restoration Project, we'd have 40 or 50 people walking the ditches and bringing stuff in. They had 4 or 5 people coming in there. It's an absolute joke. The people from Moroni sit and play beanbag because there's nothing going on, and all they did was put 3 or 4 handouts on this MS4, what they're doing. They put it on a table, and I mean, no one showed up, and it's just kind of too bad. But that's what they're doing. They're stifling citizen input on a regular basis. They sue some citizens, and what they want to do is they want to run their little fiefdom and not want to be bothered. Fortunately, Larry Lanou and myself are making noise so people are aware. That's why I do this on YouTube all around Grant Show. Also, we have a new website. It's called thegrantreporter.com. And you're going to be able to look up things on that. There's also a Wildwood Facebook page that residents can look at. And we just want to get some communication. And later on, we're going to talk about the newsletter and the inaccuracies they had in that, but we're going to save that for a little bit later. Okay. The next thing we're bringing up, if you could put the next one up, this is a JPEG. This was in the newspaper. If we could get that up, please. It's a newspaper announcement that when they had a review, that they recommended that they get an environmental impact statement before they proceeded any further. Basically what it was is it's this newspaper article that says environmental impact statement recommended for proposed ice arena. If we could go to the next one, 444.
The preliminary recommendation of Bay West is that an environmental impact statement be prepared. Basically what that means is that there were several comments that were received from different agencies that warrant further study. So initially we thought that we would have it on the agenda this evening requesting that decision be made. But we did receive a request by the applicant to hold off and delay the decision for approximately a month. Their environmental consultant was out of town, and he'd like to confer with him before the notice of decision is made. So that's the verbal update. I just wanted to make sure that everybody was aware of.
Mr. Sederstrom, tell us, with the EAW she's talking about, that's with regard to the
hockey rink.
The hockey rink project.
In other words, they May West or whatever it is, reviewed all the documentation, they input from the MPCA and Rice Creek Watershed, and they decided that, well, there is a smoking gun here. There is something that we should look into further, because there is a warning sign of there could be potential problems, and we want to, in fact, define what the potential problem is. Now, these environmental impact statements probably run up to about $80,000 to $100,000, so they're not a cheap thing. The other twist and turn in this, which we're going to be talking about, is there's another proposal for another site for this hockey arena. But so this has really slowed the process down, because
And is this site also within this area or somewhere totally different?
It's across the street from it. Mm-hmm. And they're proposing a detachment, and that's a whole separate issue we're going to talk about. But the other thing it would do, it would reduce the price of this rink too by a couple $1 million, because you wouldn't have to do all the extra things that you would have to do. Wouldn't have to put 30-foot Healy coils in to support a foundation, which, as we said before, there is a covenant in the purchase agreement that is perpetual, that says nothing will be built on this site, and of course that would involve a legal battle, and I don't believe the MPCA can just say, oh, we're going to get rid of that, because it is a contractual agreement, and as you know, the parties to the contract would have to alter it. It isn't for someone to come in and say, oh, we changed our mind in the outside agency. Bay West held an open house so that they didn't have to, but they held it so they could discuss any of the findings they had on of the reviewing of the environmental information, and citizens were allowed to speak. And so myself and Larry Lanou went to the Bay West, and we had a discussion. And this next segment is about whether or not those comments were forwarded. So if we could play the next clip, please.
To forward all comments from that public hearing, so we, as a councilman, I can review the comments that were made pertaining to the site. I haven't received it. So I was at that public hearing. Mr. Heelerner made the comment that he thought it was very disruptive. I found it very informative. So I don't know what he was evidently at a different meeting than I was at.
Can we have her answer your question first?
Yeah, I'm going to ask you, it was said that the question should be forwarded to our city administrator, and that our staff would review all comments and figure out which ones they felt were worthy to forward on to the Bay West. My question to you is, did you discuss this during a staff meeting, the questions that were referred, or did you simply refer all documentation and questions to Bay West for review?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I'm going to start with your first question, and then I'll continue forward. The first being item of clarification. There was not a public hearing held for the open.
It's an open house.
It is an open house. They are two very different things, and I want to make sure that that's on the record. The open house is actually voluntary with respect to an EAW. It was voluntarily held by the consultant, Bay West, who was preparing the document. So for the record, I'd like that clarification to be made. Secondly, the comments were requested to be forwarded to the administrator because it is a formal public comment period, and it is in compliance with the environmental assessment worksheet rules, which are mandated through the state statutes. So the public comments that were forwarded get passed through the city and directly to Bay West, who is the consultant who is preparing the document. Bay West then prepares what's called a formal response to comments. That is the draft that I just referenced for you, Councilmember Lanou, that they are preparing and have prepared and have preliminarily determined that an EIS would be warranted. Based on that package, once it is finalized, it will be submitted back to all commenters who provided comment to the administrator. So that will include any member of the public who provided comments, which I believe, Mr. Linu, you did. So you will receive a formal package when the final package is prepared, as everybody else will.
I'm glad that she made that clarification because, one, there is a difference between a public hearing and an open house. But this was the important point that she brought up, is that that open house was being held during the open comment period. So any comments that were submitted during that open house actually were being submitted as part of that open process and that period of time in which people could send in comments. So they didn't have to go to the open house to submit their comments, but if they went to the open house and they had comments, those as submitted were included. And I think she made it clear that all comments were being addressed. And I think it was important for Councilmember Larry Lanu to make that clarification to confirm that nobody was picking and choosing which comments were deemed worthy of response. Because when you get into that kind of determination, well, then what's the criteria? Who decides something is valid? On what basis do they decide a comment is valid or good or not good? And so I'm glad that she said that all comments are to be addressed as part of this, that there will be a response submitted and prepared for each and every comment so that no comments are left out. So thank you for bringing that up.
Okay, now we're going to shift gears a little bit, and we're going to go to a few of the things that were going on at the last city council meeting. I'm just giving a little potpourri, and these are very short clips. One of the things, she's a member of the staff, and that we regularly had to have staff meetings after each city council meeting to take direction, but we hear nothing about that. There's no minutes, no agenda, so if they could play the next clip, 434, and we'll talk on the other side.
Policy stating who's allowed to come.
Okay.
We don't have summaries of what is spoken. We don't have any idea the cost of them. We don't know as council members where they're even held. Are you allowed to go to staff meeting?
Are you talking to me?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't go to staff meetings even if I was allowed. That's why they're called staff meetings. They're not
That's
called
right.
mayor meetings.
So our staff is simply, but we don't have our staff meeting, has to be directed by somebody. There should be an agenda. There should be a summary of what's spoken at a staff meeting, and that should be forwarded after the staff meeting to the council people to understand what just happened at that staff meeting.
Okay.
So I think we should be talking about staff meetings.
Okay.
How often? What are the costs of the cities? We didn't have them for over a year and a half. I don't think anybody even noticed that we weren't having them. Beneficial or non-beneficial, either way, I don't think it made much
Okay,
difference.
well, let's start answering some of these questions.
There's a question as to what is the involvement of the council in governing the city? That's really ultimately what this comes to, because if the city of Grant were a Plan B city, for instance, like the city of Maplewood, the city council would have absolutely no right or possibility of being part of the staff meeting, of being included in knowing what went on in the staff meeting, because in a Plan B city, the city manager runs the city. They have control over the day-to-day affairs. That is their kingdom. And the council has no right to be a part of that. However, the city of Grant is not a Plan B city, and there is and could be a possibility that the council could be more involved in understanding what is being discussed at those staff meetings. But it depends upon how the council sees their own role. And so that's what I see is going on here, is that you have a conflict between half of the council, the majority, feeling that they're more like a Plan B city when they choose to be, and the other half, the minority, saying, well, we're not a Plan B city. We really should be more involved in the day-to-day affairs because we're a small community, and, you know, maybe that's our duty as an elected official. So that's what I see going
Well,
on
the
here.
approach is that we hire consultants and we'll let them do everything, okay? This is gonna come up with the illegal issue a little bit later. But the other thing we're coming back to is the agenda and the consent agenda. So if we could run the next clip, 435, please.
Can I restate that motion, or can that motion be restated, or how do we handle that? Because
passed.
it was incorrect.
Yeah, you can restate the motion.
Okay.
When it already passed?
They just voted and passed it, put it on the agenda. Getting fun, isn't it?
Well, fine, it's on the agenda.
Okay, we'll throw it on the agenda and we'll talk about it.
One of the things they do is they've changed the rules and saying, hey, you need a motion and a second to pull things off the consent agenda, then the full city council has to vote on it. And of course, it's a 3-2 majority, so they're always putting things on the consent agenda. For example, on the appointment list, they approved a contract for in excess of $100,000 against state statute. You have to have at least 2 bids if you go over $100,000. They put it on the consent agenda and passed it. And as you know, on the consent agenda, nothing can be discussed. It's just automatic like the electric bill. There's nothing to discuss. We got this.
Oh, that's funny. So a contract over $100,000, well, that's just on the same par as the electric bill for the month. Well, let's put it on the consent agenda. All ayes, yeah, pass 3-2.
Yep. And
There you
so
go.
we're also going to, this is the regular agenda we got it put on. In this particular case, the next one is the consent agenda. So if we could play that clip, 436, we're going to tie these together.
Motion to pull item C, dust control, so the citizens of Grant understand who's eligible for dust
Okay,
control.
and the rest of it
And
was
the
what?
other one is
D.
Stillwater Fire Department.
Great.
Because their rating is a ISO rating of 4.
Great.
It
A
will
contract
save
that's been
it will
handled for
save the
years.
citizens of Grant.
All those in favor of pulling
On
these
their
and adding
taxes.
them, please go ahead and say aye.
After that was, let me just quick address that. If you are under the auspices of a fire department with a rate of 4, it's much cheaper than you are of Montemita, which is all a volunteer, 9. So depending on which side, and of course the west half of Grant is in Montemita Fire District, the east half is in Stillwater. Well, Stillwater just built a fabulous new fire department right on the edge of the Grant territory, and so we could lower those residents could significantly lower their fire insurance if they moved the back to Jamica where it used to be. So that's the significance of that. And again,
And so, okay, so the council didn't see the value in that for the residents?
no, not at all.
I see. And what was the rationale that they gave for that?
Well, they don't give a rationale. It's a 3-2 majority, and they vote us down, and they don't let these things be explored, and that's the whole point. They have an agenda. It's lockstep. We used to have secondhand Tina. Now we have secondhand Denny. Now, the next thing we're going to be talking about, and we're going to tying back into this ice arena, is a developer has come in, and Montemita has said, well, if you want to get rid of that 70 acres with the school and the toxins and the sewer and water, the only sewer and water in Grant is the one that goes to the new Wildwood School. We will take the 70 acres with the toxins and the sewer and water, but we want 80 acres to develop. And part of the developer of that 80 acres, which, by the way, this developer is the one that's redoing the Macy's building in downtown Minneapolis, and he's putting the Wild Ice Arena on the top floor. He's a very, very well-respected developer. He will give Rink 2 10 acres to put a hockey rink on. He's going to give them on land that is not problematic. In other words, you don't have to worry about the foundation shifting, putting helicoils down. It would save $2 to $3 million on the price, and it would get it on, put it on good soil. So if we could put 437 up, please. This will help describe it a little bit. It is actually a plot of, you can't see it very well, but you can see the big square there, and right in the middle is where they'd put the hockey arena. The other acreage around it on 2 sides would be still in the city of Grant, and they will also give the Grant a 20.8 acres of a park. So they're talking about a detachment or annexment, and Mr. Lanou and I certainly support this. It gets the toxins and the problems out of Grant. So if someone sues, it's going to be Montemita that has the problem. Okay? Plus, they get some housing, and the rink too gets their hockey arena. So,
Well, that sounds like a win-win proposition to me.
Oh, yes, it
so
is.
what's the downside?
the downside is number 438, a resolution against the detachment to Mahtomedi. We haven't had the meeting yet. Before we even discuss it at a city council meeting, they've printed up a resolution that says that we don't want to do this.
This is my concern. Okay, you're showing us this resolution that it was in your packet?
It was in our packet.
Okay, so this resolution somehow has come to be in your packet. This proposal hasn't even been discussed with the council yet. So who has put together this objection to the proposal?
The mayor has.
Okay,
now
so let me ask you this. Do you suspect that the mayor has talked to two of the other council members about his resolution and his proposal to object to this plan?
Well, it's very likely, or the second scenario would be he has talked with the former mayor Tom Carr, and of course, secondhand Danny seconds and votes whatever they vote. So he doesn't think whichever way the wind is blowing with the mayor and the assistant mayor, that's the way COP votes.
Okay, so in other words, there is a foregone conclusion and agreement that even though they don't discuss the issue with him, that he is already committed to
voting.
Go vote with them no matter what it is.
Absolutely. It's really interesting because
That sounds like a possible end round the open meeting law to me.
when Tom Carr was mayor, I witnessed at a meeting him signing the resolutions. There were 3 or 4 resolutions before they were A, discussed, or B, voted upon. So before the meeting, between the taxation meeting and the city council meeting, he was signing all these resolutions just assuming they were all going to pass, which obviously with a 3-2 majority he knew they would. But still, I would think that's slightly premature to have the mayor signing resolutions before they've been discussed or voted on. But that's grand.
Absolutely. And as having been a former mayor myself, that was one practice that I was always very cognizant of, is that you wanted to make sure that anything that you were signing had already been through the council and had been approved by a vote and a resolution.
Well, the next thing we're going to be talking about legal policy, and I had this inserted in the packet to be discussed because there's been a lot of lawsuits going on. I specifically asked who decided to sue this person. They say, oh, legal counsel does that. Well, wait a minute. In our type of city, the city council should be aware and voting on which lawsuits they're proceeding with. They don't. I mean, they have the attorney, he's like a Mexican taxi driver on speed with the meter running. Sue. They sued a number of residents.
And I want to be clear for our viewers that we're not talking about criminal prosecution.
We're talking
where
civil litigation.
Right, and so there's a difference there. And for our viewers to be clear on that, I mean, with prosecution, if somebody has committed a crime, they are charged, there's a complaint, it goes through the criminal prosecution process. But with civil litigation, when a city decides to sue somebody and to engage in civil litigation, somebody had to make that decision and that it is protecting some city interest. Now, the question I have is that your attorney is only hired under contract by the city, correct?
Correct, and he should be doing what is told to by the city.
Right, but
not
there's
making all the
nothing-
decisions himself.
Right, because in his contract, it doesn't provide him as having those duties and responsibilities of deciding for the city who to engage in civil litigation, correct?
Correct.
So he doesn't have that granted to him by contract.
Well,
If he did, then maybe he could. But if he doesn't have that, well, then your question about who has given him that direction is a very good question.
let's put up the next one, 440, if we could, please. And this is a list of the legal questions that we're going to be asking. And you probably can't see it, but it's City of Grant policy, civil litigation. Who directs the litigation? Does the council give direction to the clerk? Does the council give authority for litigation? Shouldn't the council vote on litigation? In whose job description is the authority for civil litigation? What criteria is used to determine what civil litigation is pursued? How was this criteria arrived at, and was it by current or previous council? Are these criteria arbitrary? Is there an analysis of success of litigation? If not, why? Under what criteria is the council involved? Is the council involved in a decision to initiate litigation or made aware of the successes or failures of it? At what point is the League of Minnesota Cities notified of pending litigation or the outcomes? Is the League of Minnesota Cities concerned with the high level of litigation the city's pursuing? Now, this is something that's going to be discussed at the next city council meeting, because there's a lot of things happening. There's been a lot of litigation. Last year, our civil litigation was up 389%. We should be directing legal staff on what to pursue. If it's something petty, like a dog barking, why would we spend thousands of dollars if we can't get it resolved? Or the use of a logo, which is now going to the Supreme Court. So there's a lot of things that are going on. There's a tendency in Grant to help our friends and pursue our enemies. So if you're not on the right side, you're going to get sued at some point in time, or harassed or hassled. There was an 80-year-old, 83-year-old woman that has farmland, and she had a sign out. She didn't have a sign. Somebody that does her gophers put a little sign out there that getting rid of pesky rodents, and the attorney sent her a 2-page letter. Within 2 blocks of that, there were several other signs that were not fitting, but they say, oh, it's complaint-based. So in other words, unless someone writes a complaint, and many of the complaints comes from the current mayor, Mayor Huber, they go out and so he initiates, basically, is what he's doing after the fact. But let's go on. We're going to shift gears a little bit. If we can go to 441, please. And what we have here is that came out, and that was in our city newsletter. And it says property taxing districts. And it says 4% for other, Washington County 39%, Watershed 5%, Grant 17%. I think Grant isn't 17%, it's 4%. But I want to direct your attention to the 35% of our taxes that theoretically are going, which is a lie. If you are in the western half, and here's my tax statement right here, and I'm not going to put all the details because it's somewhat confidential, but put the clip back up, please. It says 35%. If you're in the Mahtomedi School District, you're paying 53 cents out of every dollar. And if you're the Mahtomedi School District, you're paying 43 cents out of every dollar.
So tell us about the 2 school districts. There's the Mahtomedi School District, and then there's the Stillwater.
Grant is split in half, basically, along Keswick Avenue. If you're the west of Keswick, you go to Mahtomedi with a 33% open enrollment. If you go east of there, you go to Stillwater. Well, the taxes are substantially lower, like up to $1,000 lower if you live in the Stillwater district. And they're trying to tell us that we only pay 35%. The Stillwater's on the low end, and they pay 43%. If you live in Mahtomedi, which district, which my tax statement provides, 53%, over 50% of it goes to the school. Now they just gave the superintendent a raise. They're $1.5 million short. Now they're going to have another levy. Imagine that. So I guess what I'm getting at is the information put forward in the newsletter, which is regular council people are not allowed to put anything in. It's run by the mayor, is inaccurate.
Well, here's the thing. If we look at that pie chart, now let's pull it up and take a look, is that it could be accurate, but you have to ask the right question. It says average school district. Well, it doesn't tell you what average school district. Is that an average statewide? Is that an average county-wide? You see what I mean? That could be an average school district, Mr. Sederstrom. It's just not the average for the city of Grant.
Yeah,
you see, so that's the question.
It comes back to figures lie and liars figure. But, I found it appalling that they would distort it that bad and put out false information when in fact everyone that looks in their taxes, especially if you're in the Montemedi side, they're saying, oh my goodness, how much are we paying this year? And again, they're going to run another levy. They're running short. They spent, it's interesting, they gave the superintendent a $20,000 or $25,000 raise when they're $1.5 million in the hole. And he's got 52 days off a year, paid holidays. So anyway.
And you know a little bit about schooling and school districts and and teaching, because, well, you're a retired teacher.
That's
so
right.
You know what? You've been there, you've done that.
That's right. So that's interesting. And we're coming back, the next clip, we're coming back to the fire department. Because remember we talked about the different things? And we finally actually,
About the rating.
the rating, Mr. Lanou tried to bring it up at a meeting and actually tried to engage Mr. Denny Kopp. And you will see his response. We actually got him to talk at a meeting, which is good. So if you could play the next clip.
Can I get a motion
department,
to
or are you
approve the
just here to
consent
second
agenda, please?
everything?
We need to keep moving on, Larry.
Yeah, you don't think the fire department's very
The
important?
consent agenda.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Great. All those in favor?
That's the most he spoke at a meeting. They don't want, it's been proposed before that they change the boundaries of the fire departments back to Jamaica, which would make it, then Stillwater would have 2/3 to 3/4 of the district, whereas Montemedi is all volunteer, and right now they have at least, half or not better. So it would reduce a lot of people's fire insurance, and because insurance is very expensive. I think my insurance runs about $6,000 a year for homeowners, because part of it is because I have a higher rate because of Montemedi, because I'm so far away from the station. Now, the big brand new fancy Stillwater, which is on County Road 12, is just a few blocks out of our city. So it would really be when they were downtown Stillwater, that was one thing. But now they have a new facility, they're much closer. It would make very good sense to use them more than Montemedi, because they're a full-time and not a volunteer.
And they would be able to provide that coverage, correct? They have the capacity for that?
Oh, absolutely. So anyway, that's the fire department. Then the next thing that we talked about at this particular meeting, we're talking about the potholes, and the roads in Grant are terrible. I've been pushing for a long time to improve the road situation. I've said we have to change road policy. I've talked about this. There was just a current meeting at Oak Hill, explaining to the residents we have to change road policy. They currently say if you live on a road, you got to fix it. And here's the example I use. Woodland Acres has approximately 70 to 80 homes, and it's on either side of Joliet, which is a major access. Well, there's only 10 people that live on Joliet, and it's breaking up very badly. They keep potholing it and potholing it. You see people driving in the middle of the road and around. It's almost like a maze to get down the road. And I said, the city of Grant should be taking a greater responsibility and perhaps pay up to 50% of the main arteries. So we're talking Joliet, we're talking Keswick, we're talking Kimbrough, some of those major roads that serve as the access points to the different neighborhoods should be a little bit better, should be taken care of by the city. And they don't want to do that. But this next one is about, we have a company called Brockman Blacktopping, and they're out potholing. And so we'll have a clip on this.
A new 3-year contract with Brockman Blacktopping Company. As most of you know, they've been doing our pothole filling and patching for the last 3 years. And they've done a really nice job. They've actually done a couple of our other special roads projects, specifically Keats Avenue. I've listed the new hourly rates that Brockman had proposed. These rates are very similar to the same rates that we had 3 years ago. So I guess it would be my recommendation that we award a contract to Brockman for the next 3-year contract for pothole patching. And
Mr. Carr.
Well, Mr. Sederstrom, I can see where there's a value to your idea that there be a road policy that is a little different from what the normally thought of road policy would be. Now, say for instance, if you're in the city of Maplewood, you know, the city wants to do a road project. They have special assessments, and there are state laws having to do with special assessments, that that assessment cannot be more than the amount that road improvement is going to increase the value of that property. Well, you know, there's a fine line there between repair of a road and a total reconstruction and you know, putting in new roads. But in your case, in the city of Grant, you've got large parcels. And so the amount of frontage that any one property owner would have conceivably could be very large. So if you relied upon special assessments, they would be overly burdensome and expensive for that property owner, that people would not be able to own property there. And yet, if you just say, well, we're going to wait until people put their money together and then they're going to repair the road, then that's what you got, is that you've got big potholes. So you do need to have something a little more comprehensive, thinking about how can we, as a city, think of our roads as a community asset, just the same as if you had city water or something like that, where it's a community asset. And so certainly in the city of Grant, you have a combination of paved roads and dirt roads, because again, you want to keep dirt roads as well, because you've got a lot of horse owners there in the city of Grant. So it really is a community asset. People with horses are using the dirt roads, people with cars are using the paved roads.
Well, I just attended a seminar at Eckberg Glamours, and they were talking about bonding and roads and assessments. Mm-hmm. And what I was getting at is the city can bond for some of those roads, but they have to assess, according to the state laws, they have to assess 20% of it.
That's correct.
But you know, if we're talking 10 owners on a mile stretch of road.
Right, but if that assessment does not increase the market value of their property, then that assessment is not going to hold up in district court if they challenge it.
Well, the point I'm making, though, is there's 10 people paying for this straight thoroughfare into a neighborhood, and there's 70 to 80 houses that live off it and use it on a daily basis. Well, why should the 10 people that live on the main thoroughfare have to fund the whole ticket when there's 70 families using it on top of the 10 that use it every day? It doesn't make good public policy or public sense to do that. And it's gotten to the point of it's a safety hazard, health and safety, because the roads are so bad. But that's one of the things we're working on. It probably won't change because I'm in the minority. The other thing is that we had at the same meeting was kind of a blindside. They put something on the agenda that said refund, and we didn't know anything about it, but obviously the rest of the city council and the clerk knew about it. Larry Lanou had a fire at his house, and he went in to get blueprints because his insurance company required it. So let's watch this next clip, 446, and we'll talk on the other side.
Mr. Lanou, you came into the city, you left a deposit of $50 to remove a blueprint of a rather large pole barn on your property. You signed a receipt for that, I believe, or were given a receipt for that, and you left with that blueprint. You have never returned it. The city remains in possession of your $50 deposit. I'm just going to ask you a simple question. Are you going to take a copy of that blueprint and bring the original back? Yes or no? Simple.
Well, I don't think it's all
Wasn't gonna be
that
that
simple.
simple?
Let's
Okay.
go back to where this happened.
Okay.
This was about 4 or 5 days after I had a house fire. I
Okay.
asked for the blueprint.
All
I asked Kim, what is the
Blueprint of what,
percentage
sir?
of my home?
Of your home, okay? It's
So
not
that
of
I
your
could-
barn, it's of your home.
Of my home, I had a house fire. You were aware of it.
Yep.
So I simply asked her for a copy of the blueprint. She said, you can't have it. It's government property. I says, how many blueprints of this homes do you have in Grant? Do you have 50%? No. Maybe 30? Well, maybe. Are mine that important? Because we could probably go to court and get a copy of the blueprint so I could give it to my
You have a
insurance
copy of the
adjuster.
blueprint. Are you gonna bring it back, yes or no?
I don't have the damn.
You don't have it anymore? You got rid of it? Okay, Kevin, if we hold a deposit for $50 for a blueprint that was taken from the city office, no matter whose blueprint it was, if the applicant does no longer have the blueprint to bring back to the city or to make a copy of, do we just put that $50 in the general fund, or how do we handle that?
Yes, that becomes city money.
Okay, and do we need a motion?
No,
we
I
need
do
I'm
have a
asking the
question
attorney.
for Mr.
Do
Sandberg.
we make a motion to do that, or does it just go through there through the clerk's counting efforts?
Well, the clerk has certainly been concerned about this particular issue, and so I
Right.
think the clerk would prefer a formal motion
Okay.
to put that money in the
Okay.
general fund.
Okay.
Now is up
Sounds
for
good.
discussion.
we haven't
Kim,
got a
can
motion
you,
yet.
I'd like a point of
Can I
clarity
get a
before we
motion?
go forward.
I'll make a motion to put that $50 into the general.
This is how that whole thing should have been handled, if you would like to know my 2 cents.
Sure.
First of all, if somebody goes to the city and says, I would like a copy of a document, under the Data Practices Act, they would fill out a form. And I know that the City of Grant has a form for that. So you fill out the form, and then they produce a copy of whatever it is that you're asking for. And the originals stay at City Hall. The city clerk, who is the responsible authority, has a copy printed up, however that is, and then they typically would charge the reasonable cost of that copy to the person who's making a request. And probably that cost would be less than the $50 deposit. This sounds to me like a way to capitalize on somebody else's misfortune, because unfortunately, everybody in the community knows that council member Lanu had a house fire, and that it was not just a little one, it was a fairly large one. And now we have the mayor of the city of Grant capitalizing on this unfortunate incident that happened to the council member Lanu and making a big scene and mockery of it. And that, of course, is just not kind, and in my estimation is actually quite rude.
Well, next show we're going to be bringing some more things in. They've been going after him quite regularly.
Who?
Larry Lanu, he's got a CUP, and now they're coming after him because he gave them an official Washington County aerial topography survey. The city is now saying, well, that's not suitable. Many other citizens come in and use the same thing. Again, they're singling this thing out. It's arbitrary and capricious. We're going to shift gears. This is still at the same meeting. Let's play clip 447 if we could, please.
Planning Commission meeting. Following the Planning Commission, our city clerk, our city administrator, and 4 members of the Planning Commission had an open meeting violation. I'll just give you a picture of it over here if you'd like. So would they be covered in an open meeting violation? That's not in their due diligence. So at this time, because our clerk does know better, our city administrator and our city planner, I would ask that they simply resign their duties because they did participate in a open meeting violation. And we will send that into the League of Minnesota Cities, and then we'll determine if they're covered.
I hope that there's coverage for open meeting violations under your contract with the league.
That will never be pursued unless Larry and I would pursue it, or another individual, because again, Etberg Lammers does whatever the mayor wants. He pretty much is, mayor's taking him off the leash, and they do whatever they want to do. But this is just an example. You notice that he gave it to the attorney, and the attorney basically handed it back to him. So that's kind of interesting. And we're going to play the next clip now. It's kind of interesting because I wasn't allowed to participate in this last meeting. Several times I tried to have input. I was not called on, and I just sat quietly. Interestingly enough, that same city attorney left a voicemail on my telephone saying that if I come to the Etberg Lammers seminar on city council law, that I better behave myself and not be disruptive, which I thought that rather interesting. But again,
he must have you confused with the mayor of the city of Grant.
Perhaps he does. Arrogant, disingenuous mayor. Okay, let's play this last clip, please, if we could.
Something positive,
Yes,
hopefully.
I wanted to ask a question.
I was wondering if the next meeting
You're allowed.
in May, that I tried to discuss at least 3 times and haven't been allowed to participate, so hopefully next meeting you will recognize me and allow me to speak. I would really appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, let's
Oh, my goodness.
I mean, the arrogant, condescending, disingenuous, that is the mayor. He's just over the top. And again, any idea I bring in, they will not consider. I've gotten one thing through, which is limiting the size of garages on lots under 2.5 acres. There was a man that had a Rambler with a 2-car garage. He decided to put an addition, and he put an addition on the back of his house, which is a 30 by 60 pole building. And on the second story, he had an apartment. Well, on under 2.5 acres, that is not appropriate. If you're above 2.5 acres, there are designations for how many square feet of each building you can have. But there was nothing in the ordinance under 2.5 acres, so I finally got them to limit it to 1,000 square feet. But I did that through the planner. Anytime I come up with something like fixing McCusick Road for $130,000, now when they went out and talked to the residents, they said it was going to cost $250,000 to $350,000 because they're going to rebuild it. I mean, there's nothing in the middle. We could have patched the potholes and put an overlay and made an 8 to 10 year fix. But again, getting back to the road policy and other things, they're not taking my suggestions. They will not even consider anything I have. And for example, like this detachment, they haven't even heard about it. And they already have something to vote on to turn it down before it's even discussed. So this is, they're basically, it's the Three Stooges running the city.
And I would have to say, and this ties into what we've discussed in previous programs in our all-around grant updates and additions, is that Robert's Rules of Order are not really being used at the council meetings of the City of Grant. But the purpose behind the Robert's Rules of Order and why so many organizations use Robert's Rules of Order is because Robert's Rules of Order is a way that all voices can be heard.
Basically,
whether you are in the majority or you are in the minority, there is an avenue by which your voice can be heard as part of that meeting. And when you don't use those Robert's Rules of Order, well, this is what happens, is that then you have arbitrary decisions by the chair deciding who gets to talk and who doesn't.
Well, we can summarize it very easily by saying Robert's Rules provides the will of the majority, but safeguards the voice of the minority. So we can get all the different aspects heard, we can get the pros and cons. And again, this is something that they do not want. As a matter of fact, they won't even take public comment. Again, if public comment is for people to come up and voice concerns, like there's a pothole in 105th and I lost a wheel in it, or the neighbor's house is broken into. Again, this is another thing to share ideas. They want to manage all the information, manage the ideas, and limit. They only want their ideas out. But I think that pretty much wraps this one up. Again, I want to tell the people there's a new website called grantreporter.com. And of course, I'm on YouTube, All Around Grant. So thank you for joining us, and thank you for having me, Diana. We've covered a lot of information, but next month we're going to have even more.
Thank you very much. Well, it's been a pleasure to have you here, Mr. Sederstrom. And viewers, thank you for tuning in this week. Hope you've enjoyed the program. We'll be back again next week with a new topic and new information. See you then. Bye-bye.
And therefore, Chairman, I have a statement. I have a procedural question, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I have a procedural question. Mr. Chairman, you cannot run a committee like this. You just cannot do this. We're better than that as a country. We're better than that as a committee. I have asked for a few minutes to ask a procedural fighting? What's the big deal? May I ask my question? May I state my statement?
You're all free to leave. We've adjourned, but the gentleman may ask his question.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I have one procedural question, and it goes to trying to help you get the information, by the way, that you just asked.
What is your question?
Let me say what I have to say. I've listened to you for the last 15 or 20 minutes. Let me say what I have to say.